Hey, welcome back to a new installment of the Wide Ride Podcast. I'm Manny Navarro, Miami Hurricanes writer for The Athletic, joined today by Charles Fishbein of Elite Scouting Services. It is Thursday, April 11th, close to 2 p.m. Just got back home from Coral Gables. Cam Ward spoke to reporters today for the first time. Mario Cristobal is preparing for the spring game on Saturday. It's going to be televised at 4 p.m. on ACC Network. So we got a lot of different things to talk about. Charles, of course, has been around this state for a long time, uh, tracking recruiting. He's been out at a bunch of practices. You get the cool kids pass, brother, because you're a scout. So Mario lets you in there to watch, and you're not a reporter per se, so you get to wear the other hat and actually watch what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you got good relationships. But
Ah,
it took me like 30 years to get to the front of the line, and now it's funny to actually be able to get into where I used to be like Joe Pesci in Casino Black Book. So
well, you do some stuff for Rivals, of course, and you were at the Rivals camp this past weekend, the one that they had at St. Thomas Aquinas, and you're very much up on recruiting. So that's a big reason why we brought you on the show. We wanted you to talk about some of the guys that you saw out there. We'll get into that in a little bit. We'll probably do some mailbag questions as well. But Charles, since Ward talked today and you've been out, what is it, 2 or 3 practices you've been to for Miami?
two practices I've been to.
You've been out there, you've watched him throw twice. What is your impression of him as a quarterback? I know that he was already viewed by a lot of people as a potential NFL guy. You've seen a lot of quarterbacks at Miami over the years. How good is he?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to go back to Ken Dorsey, where they've had a kid with this much talent and upside. And, you don't really know how good someone is till you get to see them live and in person and be right, close to them at their practice. His ability to get rid of the ball super quick decision maker. He gets the balls into the playmakers' hands and let them do what they need to do. And that's what Dorsey used to do. And people were like, "Oh, Dorsey wasn't that great of a quarterback." Dorsey knew how to get his playmakers the ball quickly and let them be stars. Cam's got more talent, but he has that same ability to, throw the ball. It hits receivers in stride. I actually had a practice yesterday. I was trying to teach, my son and a wide receiver the understanding of when you run a route, you want to hit guys in stride so they don't have to slow down or stop. It makes such a big difference. The difference between a 5 yard catch and not getting a first down and a 5 yard catch getting up the field quickly and moving the chains. And that could not only help the offense, but it helps the defense, sustaining drives. You've seen it the last couple of years where Miami would get on a roll offensively and then their offense would bog down. I don't think you're going to see that this year with this kid because he is so good and so accurate. His anticipation, he throws receivers open. I don't think fans realize how important that is. It's not about just a quarterback throwing and the receiver getting open. It's the quarterback's ability to throw it to a spot that receivers in that spot, they throw them open and they're able to do something without after the catch. And that's what Cam Ward is so good at. It's a major difference. I think the fans are really in for an exciting year, something they haven't had in a long time. I think they're going to be excited to see what Cam Ward can do in this offense.
You've written a lot about Florida State and been around the program a lot. They obviously had a huge bounce back year, one of the most exciting offenses that any team in this state has had in a while, with Jordan Travis and some of the weapons that he had on offense. For the college football writer who covered the ACC championship game, saw Florida State go 13-0 before they got all those players sat out the bowl game and they didn't get into the playoff. They got robbed of a playoff spot. How does this offense, in your mind, compare to that Florida State offense? Because I guess my question is, can Miami win an ACC title with this offense? Does it compare at all to you? Where do you see maybe some deficiencies still in this offense?
Well, I think Cam's a more talented player than Jordan, but Jordan knew that offense so well. It was basically he was a coach on the field, and I think that was very important. That him being in that system for 4 years, where Cam hasn't been in this system, it's a totally different system than what he's ran at Washington State. So there'll still be some growing pains. You didn't see that with Jordan last year because, like I said, there was a maturation process. He had been through all the wars, and then last year was a culmination of all that hard work that he put in. I think he's a different kid in that, I try to tell people Travis was a different type of player in this day and age where everybody's more about themselves. Travis basically gave himself to that program, worked extremely hard, and I don't think you can duplicate that because he wasn't the most physically gifted kid out there. He didn't have the biggest, strongest arm. Where Cam has those fit, you can see when you go out to practice why Norvell waited so long to see if he could get Cam Ward, because I believe if Cam Ward goes to Florida State this year, from what I've seen in the 2 practices, you're talking a team that could compete for a national title and possibly win it. I think DJ's very talented. He's going to fit the scheme that Florida State has, but Cam's at a different level as a thrower. You just see it. I'm telling you, once you see it, it looks different. Until you see it, you just hear the rumors, you hear this, but it just looks different. You could ask anybody that's been out there. It looks different coming. You haven't seen a quarterback where the ball came out of his hand like this at a UM practice, maybe since like a Kyle Wright. And Kyle Wright was super talented. He didn't pan out, but the arm talent, you talk about, coaches talk about hand talent, arm talent, anticipation, being all the tools that you need to be a great quarterback. Cam Ward has that.
And from an offensive skill level, I know the DBs at times kind of looked overmatched most of spring. I know that this last recent scrimmage that they had a week ago Saturday, the defense looked a lot better from all accounts. But for the most part, I mean, the receivers have eaten for Miami. Xavier Restrepo has been really, really good in camp. Jacoby George, they've had some of the younger receivers, Nye Carr, JoJo Trader, Isaiah Horton, who's kind of the new big outside receiver. How does the passing game in terms of the weapons compare to Florida State and their ACC championship team? Do you think Miami is close to what FSU had, or would you still have taken what FSU had in terms of skill position players?
I mean, Keon Coleman's going to be a first-round pick and most likely, and you had Johnny Wilson, and they had guys that not only had talent but experience. I think Miami's still a little level below that. As I think JoJo Trader has the ability to be one of those elite receivers in college football, but he's still a freshman. There's a big difference between freshman year and guys that basically were in football for 2 or 3 years. Physically, you just see it with a guy that's been on campus for 2 years. Physically, they look different. You see it with the Miami players. The guys that have been there multiple years look different than the freshmen. When you have a freshman that looks like a senior, those are elite style freshmen. Elijah Lofton, the kid that they got, University of Miami got from Vegas this year. He's one of those guys that just goes out there and you're like, oh, who's this kid? And then you look down and you realize that he's a freshman and you're like, all right, this kid's going to be special. So there are those exceptions. I mean, you go all the way back to the Andre Johnsons, the Sean Taylors. There are those exceptions. That's when you know you're really good, really good. Miami's got some really good talent. I think the quarterback makes it all happen. If you don't have a quarterback, you could have all of those receivers. You saw Florida State still had those guys when Jordan Travis went down, but they had to go to the backup, and the backup, being a freshman, didn't have that same ability to get those guys the ball. He wasn't able to do those same things. Cam's going to make the players around him better. Those receivers are going to look a lot better this year because they're catching a ball. Like I said, you got a guy that on 3rd and 7 is going to be to hit 8 yards on a comeback route or something, move the chains. The offense is just going to be more consistent because of that position. And the talent level is getting better at receiver. Like I said, you like what you've seen from JoJo. You like what you've seen from the Horton kid. You like some of these other guys. They just have to do it. They haven't done it yet. And until they do it, you're going to just hear that same thing, that potential word, potential. Yeah. But I think they sit in a really good spot. Listen, Mario wanted to build this team inside out. You talk about the secondary. I think at the end of the day, yes, they have some weaknesses on the back end, but if that front end can get pressure on the quarterback and you can protect that back end, you could scheme on the back end. You can't scheme the back end no matter how talented it is if you can't get pressure on the quarterback. You're going to just be putting yourselves in a bad situation. So Miami's strength is up front, O-line, D-line. That was purposely where Mario put his emphasis. I think it kind of slowed the process because you don't have those so-called playmakers up front that you do at skill positions. But this is how he wanted to build the team, and I think you're going to start to see it pay off this year, especially in that old offensive line with a quarterback that can make things happen. He's going to just listen. If there's like weakness in that old line, Cam kind of helps that out because he gets rid of the ball so quick. You're not going to have those sacks that you had last year with Van Dyke, that maybe a more athletic or a more nimble quarterback will get rid of the ball, even if he throws it away. Now it's 2nd and 10 instead of 2nd and 20.
Yeah. Miami had a great year run, a great 12 year run with quarterbacks in the 80s and 90s. I only bring this up because I'm reading my article that's going to be coming out tomorrow in The Athletic. I mentioned how Miami used to be called Quarterback U. Jim Kelly, Bernie Kosar, Vinny Testaverde, Steve Walsh, Craig Erickson, Gino Torretta. I mean, all six of those guys were drafted. Two of them won Heisman trophies. One of those guys went #1 overall. Jim Kelly, of course, is in the NFL Hall of Fame. They combined for 4 national championships. So obviously, having an elite quarterback is makes all the difference. And it's been a while. If you think about it, Dorsey was a 7th-round pick. Miami's had one quarterback drafted during these 20 or so mediocre years, Fish. I mean, basically Brad Kaya, who didn't even end up throwing an NFL pass because he had a back injury and et cetera. So it's been a while. And I think it's an important season for Miami for Cam Ward to do well because he'll help recruit future quarterbacks, right? Like you think there'll be other guys that watch him this year and say, man, is that offense exciting? Can I go to Miami, via the transfer portal and do some of the same things. So I think this is such a sort of pivotal season for Mario to get things right. I don't think the ACC is particularly elite this year. There's no real elite teams in my mind. So I think, there's a possibility that Miami could win the conference this year. I know you've been telling me they've been getting better after watching them through 2 practices. What is your overall takeaway? What is the ceiling
Well,
for this team?
I mean, last year, and I know that last year was a disappointment, but I remember going to the Clemson game, and the one thing I noticed as an identity that Mario was trying to build is being a physical team. And you saw in that game, it was the first time I saw in about 15, 20 years, Miami by the fourth quarter physically beat another team up. When was the last time they just lined up and bullied somebody? And I think that, yeah, there's some setbacks, but that was promising that you saw
Yeah.
a team that came into a game and physically beat up a team that has dominated not only the ACC, but college football for 15 years, that you start to see what he's trying to get across. And I think that some of those things you have step backs and you understand as a coach that you're going to have that, but it's worth what you're trying to build once you see it all come together. I think that, yes, the ACC's down. You go look at the quarterbacks across the conference. Miami is the best quarterback in the conference pretty much. And that changes everything. You go look at any conference. You look at the SEC, you look at the Big 12, you looked at what the Pac-10 had last year. The teams that had quarterbacks were successful. The teams that didn't have quarterbacks struggled. I truly believe if you had put Cam Ward on Miami last year, they have at least 2 more wins. But they have them now. With him in every game, even if they get in a 50-48 shootout, that he has the ability to keep putting points on the board. And you're going to have those games in college football now where your defense isn't going to get stops and you need the offense to keep scoring. They weren't able to keep up with teams the last couple of years. It's like they had to play this ball control, slow offense, play kind of like old school Big Ten football just to stay in games. And once the game got out of hand, they didn't have the ability to catch up. And that's because of the quarterback position.
Yeah. You go back to the end of last year. I mean, Miami started 4-0. They were number 17 in the AP poll. Everybody thought, man, they beat Texas A&M. They scored a bunch of points. This is going to be the offense. Well, Van Dyke went the opposite way over the conference schedule. He had more interceptions thrown, 11, than touchdowns, 8, and really just struggled reading defenses. He got hurt. You had to throw the true freshman in there, Emory Williams. Then you get to the bowl game, and you're throwing Jakari Brown out there against Rutgers. This is an entirely different animal with Ward at the quarterback position. And so it's going to be really interesting to see. One thing I wrote about for my story, Fish, is, Ward spent 2 weeks when he announced he was going to the NFL on January 1st. He spent 2 weeks in Jacksonville training at the QB Collective, which is the same place that has produced, some guys. Caleb Williams was working out there, Brock Purdy, Anthony Richardson. And he was out there for 2 weeks working with Will Hewlett, who I think is the quarterbacks coach at St. Augustine High, as well. And for my story, we got a chance to talk to Will. He said the biggest thing with Cam is just putting him, in an offense where he actually has an offensive line, because he was sacked 86 times at Washington State, fumbled 46 times in his career. With some of the things he's going to have at Miami, he's going to have a chance to thrive. He's going to be able to hand the ball off, depend on the running game. I'm really excited to see what they do here. But Hewlett is a good coach, and I know that
Yeah.
QB Collective has really done a good job turning guys out the last few years.
Well, the one thing you're going to notice is that when you put a quarterback in situations, and I think people just don't understand this part of the game, they overlook it, is I believe you have to win first down. You know, you don't want to be in 2nd and 10, 2nd and 15. I don't care. There's very few quarterbacks. Maybe when Jameis was in college, maybe you have a Patrick Mahomes that when they're not playing in front of the sticks, they're not going to be successful. And how many times last year was Miami in 2nd and 13? They lost first down. I think Cam changes that. He puts you in a situation where you're in more 2nd and 6s, 2nd and 5s, where now the play calling opens up. The coach has more plays to call from. You don't have to be as conservative. I just think when you have a quarterback that you know that can win 2nd and 3rd downs for you and keep the chains moving, that play caller gets more confidence. The players around that player get more confidence. You could see that the coaches and the players lost confidence in Van Dyke at some point last year, and he couldn't get it back, and that wasn't coming back. And that's very discouraging when you're on that team. You know, the quarterback's the leader of the team. If the players aren't getting led by the quarterback, you're not going to win a lot of ball games. You're going to have seasons like you had last year where you got off to a fast start, and then right when the kid struggled, all of a sudden the team struggles as well. And it affects your offense, it affects your defense, it affects your special teams. You can't get out of your own end. Then all of a sudden you're punting, you're giving the other team good field position. You are not going to win ball games if all your team has to do is go 80 yards on every drive and have to be perfect on every 3rd down. And it's just their team wasn't set up for that style of football, and now they are.
Yep. And one thing I like that Shannon Dawson is doing is he's allowing, and Cam Ward talked about this today, he's allowing him to coach up the receivers. In other words, he's able to go out there and tell them, hey, you're running this route short, or you're running this route too long. So depth, distance, all those kind of things matter. And I think it's because Miami trusts Ward. They know he's started 44 games in college. He's thrown for over 13,000 yards, over, I think, 120 touchdown passes. So it's like having a pro quarterback in your camp, and they're giving him the opportunity to basically work with his receivers and really get those things right. I'm sure Jordan Travis probably had some of those freedoms as well with his receivers.
There's no question, but you know, you want your receivers running the right depth and not drifting on a route or rounding out the routes, because anytime you alter a route, and that's what defensive backs are trying to do, is get a receiver off their marks. Yeah. If a receiver is not in the spot where the route calls for, it throws everything off. You're going to have the wide receivers running poor routes. You're going to have the quarterback making a poor throw. So it all goes hand in hand.
Yep. If you want to check out that story on Cam Ward, Max Olson, who is one of our national reporters, The Athletic, he and I teamed up to write that article. It'll be coming out Friday, tomorrow, in The Athletic. And again, we talked to Hewlett, we talked to Cam's father, we talked to a lot of different people for the story, and just kind of how he's the big hope for Miami this season. I think most of the season rides on his shoulders, and how good and how great he can be. And there's no doubt he wants to be a 1st-round quarterback. And if he ends up being a 1st-round pick, Fish, I think Miami's gonna have a really good year.
Oh, I definitely think. Listen, I think the one thing too, and you haven't brought it up, is they have a quality backup in Reese.
Yeah.
I don't ask me how to pronounce his last name.
Poffenbarger. Yeah.
Poffenbarger. All right. Well, Reese is honestly probably one of the best backup quarterbacks in college football. They have a guy that if for some reason Cam gets hurt, for even if it's for a series or two, their offense isn't going to go into a funk. You saw last year, like I said, Florida State, Jordan was their whole team. And then when he went down, they didn't make the playoffs because people didn't believe their backup was able. I think Reese is able to carry on this is probably the strongest quarterback room Miami's had. I think Judd's played very well in the limited times I've seen him. I'm a fan of Emory, so I think they got a strong room now that maybe they didn't have, and other teams don't have that same luxury, that they have a quality backup just in case their starter goes down.
Yeah, I think that was really important to Mario, in terms of rounding this team out. He didn't want to go into the season without being able to trust the backup quarterback. And it's not that they don't trust Emory Williams, because I think they really like Emory Williams a lot. I think it's just more about, hey, let's redshirt this guy. He's already a sophomore. If we don't need to play him, we can redshirt and we can get Poffenbarger to be the backup, and he can run this offense. And I talked to Malik Rozier, the former Miami quarterback, who's the only quarterback in the last 2 decades to lead Miami to a double-digit win season, Fish. And that's shocking for some old school Miami fans to hear.
I saw him at the Rivals. He's a great guy.
He is a great dude.
He's really, I think he's turned out, him as a quarterback coach, I think he does a very good job. He teaches a lot of the same stuff. Like my son, who's trying to become a quarterback. A lot of the stuff that he teaches, Rozier, his quarterback teaches. I think he's very good at what he does. So.
Well, what I was going to say is Rozier told me he compares Poffenbarger a little bit to Johnny Manziel in terms of his style of play, not necessarily the skill
Yeah.
set, but the style of play
Yeah.
is kind of a Johnny Manziel like. And if you look at Poffenbarger's numbers at Albany and kind of a guy that's mobile, he's not just a statue back there, and he's also a gunslinger. He'll throw it down the field in practice. So interesting to see what he'll look like on Saturday in the spring game. Mario said the first half will be live action. The second half is going to be just thudding, so nobody will be getting tackled. He's trying to avoid injuries. Obviously, we're not going to see a whole lot in terms of plays. They saved all that for the previous 2 scrimmages that they did in camp the last 2 weekends. So, Fish, let's turn the subject to this because starting Tuesday, the transfer portal window opens for the spring, and it's going to be a very interesting 2 weeks when it opens. There's going to be a lot of guys, I think, jumping in there. One of them for Miami already did, Nigel Lee Kelly, who was kind of a rotational guy at defensive end coming off of injury. We just did the roster count, the scholarship count for Miami, and you and I counted up at 89, when you include special teams. And Cristobal today basically referenced the fact there's going to be guys that are leaving. There's no question. When you watch that team practice, where do they still need help via the portal?
I think the main part is the secondary. I think, you've got the corner they got from Heritage last year. I think he has a chance. Yeah, I think he has a chance to be very good. I think there's a couple other guys in that secondary. Zaquan Patterson's going to be very good, but he's only a freshman. When we talked about that, you're asking a lot. I just think they need some more experience back there, some guys that understand what they're trying to do. They need to upgrade that room. And that's going to happen. Like I said, Mario he decided to blow that thing up and rebuild it from the ground up. And he did it from inside out. And the corner position, it's one, they've lost out on a couple guys. And 2, it's just one of those things. It's timing. They haven't had the time to get all these. You're trying to fix 85 spots on a roster. You're not going to get all of them done in 1 or 2 years. Like, you have to understand.
Right.
So I think the transfer portal gives them a chance to upgrade that back end of that defense. If they could get one guy that's a starter at another program that was productive, they're in good shape. If they could get 2, then you're talking their secondary all of a sudden goes from maybe not a weakness, but something of you're questioning to potentially a pretty good secondary. I think that's the only part. I think linebacker wise, I like what they have at linebacker. Their defense up front, I think is going to be one of the best in the state. The country as far as college football. They're going to be really good up front. They haven't even gotten some of the guys in that they recruited this year. So depth wise, talent wise, I think they're in a good spot up front, but it's that secondary. They give up a lot of plays. I think their offense is a lot better, and I think their receivers are a lot better. But that's the one thing when you're watching them, they give up a lot of big plays in practice. And I just think that's because they probably don't have a lot of depth. So the guys that are good, the starters, you're fine with, but you're going through a long season. You don't want to have to sit out there and have to go and have your team score 50 in a game just because you run out of depth on that back end.
Yeah, Daryl Porter is a 5th-year senior, another guy that they got in via West Virginia a couple years ago. He was pretty solid last year for Miami. You think he's going to be a starter on the outside for sure? I would think Jakari Brown is kind of opposite him, and then you have Mish Powell who started for Washington, a team that reached the national title game, started most of the season for Washington. He can play slot corner, nickel corner, or go back and play safety. So I think it just depends on who else Miami gets through the portal. I think one name to watch is this kid Dione Hill, who was a 9-game starter at Marshall last season. Of course, Miami picked up Chevis Jackson, who was his position coach at Marshall. Dione just announced that he was entering the portal on Tuesday. But you're right. I think depth wise,
you want numbers. You want numbers.
Yeah.
Like, listen, you named 3 guys. Like, how deep can we really go in that secondary right now where you're like, all right, you really want 7 or 8 quality DBs. And it's not just because the game's changed. You don't really have parts anymore. These guys are interchangeable. They can play more than one position. They don't really have a lot of guys that can go and play corner, safety, slot corner, free safety, strong, like moving around these pieces. You go to 5 and 6 defensive backs, and they start to go into situations where they need more defensive backs, how deep can they go down that roster right now? That I don't think they have that fifth, sixth, seventh guy that they're like, all right, we feel really comfortable throwing these guys out there. And you're going to be in games that you play spread offenses. One guy gets dinged up. What happens if Porter goes down or the other corner goes down, Brown? All of a sudden, you're going into that depth, and it could be a hole back there where all of a sudden was a decent situation becomes a disaster real quick.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately why they'll be shopping, so to speak, in the transfer portal here in the next few weeks. And they'll be losing some guys too. There's going to be guys that leave. It's just the way it is. Nobody wants to sit on the bench and wait. And I think you're going to see probably in the range of somewhere to 10 to 15 departures, and probably somewhere in the range of like 6 to 8 to 10 additions via the portal. It's what I'm expecting anyway. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with them and other programs around the country. Fish, let's talk a little recruiting now. Miami's got 6 commitments in their class. We know Mario's a great recruiter. They got 4 guys from in-state. I know one of the guys they picked up is this tight end, Luca Gilbert out of Ohio, 6'7", like 240 pounds. He's out of Lakota West High School, 4-star guy. I think he's ranked 254th or whatever in the 247 Sports Composite. I know you probably don't know a lot about Luca since he's in Ohio and you're primarily in the state. So I'm going to ask you about the state guys. There's four guys in this, that are in-state recruits. Elijah Melendez, who I think is taking an unofficial visit to Michigan this weekend. Gerard Pringle, the running back out of Sefner Armwood, that Miami feels really good about. They really like him. Waden Charles, receiver out of Palm Beach Central. I think Waden's been looking at other schools too. And then Lamar Williams, an offensive tackle out of Havana, Gadsden County. He's a 3-star kid. Of those 4 guys that I mentioned from in-state, who do you like the most and why?
I think the Pringle kid, just because it's versatility. You're not talking about a kid that just pigeonholed at playing running back in this day and age of spread offense. You can move him out of the backfield, put him in the slot. He can get one-on-one with some linebackers. That's a plus situation. You can get him the ball in a jet sweep. There's so much you can do with him. He's got a lot of speed. He has that ability to make a 5 or 10 yard gain become a 60-yard touchdown. So they're adding more speed to their their offense. And you see it, with a couple of the guys at Miami now, they have that ability, but this brings just another piece to the puzzle of being able to really open up your offense and be able to do some multiple stuff. So I really like Pringle a lot.
Did you get a chance to see Luke Nickel, the quarterback out of Georgia, Alpharetta? I know he came down and played I think against Cooper City last year. I watched him there.
Yeah, I evaluate the kids out of Georgia. He's a really good quarterback. He should be definitely more of a high 4-star type kid. He's definitely one of the top quarterbacks probably in the country. And, I think they've done a good job of finding these guys, quarterbacks. Everybody talks about Elite 11 and, we got to get one of those guys. And if you really look at the history of Elite 11 and the so-called elite quarterbacks, most of those guys don't pan out. It's usually like 2 out of 11 that really pan out. It's the coaches that can find these guys. Coach Shannon has found them at other schools. This kid's got an arm. He can make all the throws. He can do some stuff. He does need to be refined a little bit, but you can see the upside with him when you watch him in person.
All right, let's talk about this Rivals camp. Miami's obviously going to be busy with recruiting. They've got a bunch of guys that they're after. They're going to be hosting them in May. We'll probably bring you back to talk then. But let's talk about the guys that were at the Rivals camp this past weekend at St. Thomas Aquinas. You wrote an article for Rivals about just, some of the dudes who stood out. Max Buchanan, Zaire Addison, you said they stole the show. FSU's obviously in on some of these guys too. So is Florida. Addison's a 6'4", 280-pound offensive tackle out of Summer. Max Buchanan out of Seminole High School, 6'4", 275. Mario Cristobal loves him some offensive linemen. I don't know that he's got Buchanan and Addison high on the register for himself, but what blew you away about some of the big uglies there at the camp?
The one thing that's impressive about Addison, he's kind of built like a track athlete, real high hips, high backside, long legs, and he's got small ankles. He looks like an athlete. And then I found out he does run track. So you can see, he's an athlete. Big kid. I think he's played basketball. He's raw, but you see why coaches like him. Can move laterally really well. Knows the one thing you want to see with offensive linemen is when they go, say that they're playing right tackle and they adjust. The guy goes up the field, that when the defensive end cuts back inside or does a swim move, that they can adjust. Addison's one of those guys that can quickly readjust his body, get back in front of the defensive end that he's blocking. He's super athletic, but he's raw. You can see there's some flaws in his game. Sometimes he leans or bends over to block, which is technique stuff. Technique stuff you can always work with. You want to know when you're recruiting offensive linemen, and I think Mario looks at this. Are they, one, do they have the size and length? Do they move well laterally? Can they bend? And are they coachable? If they're coachable and they're willing to work hard, if they have the physical attributes and they're able to move, they can bend, they can redirect. Those are the traits that Mario and his staff look at. They feel the technique side, hey, we could teach this kid. They don't want a kid that already has great technique, because what happens is with a lot of those guys, and this happens with a lot of guys that are finished products, is once they're coached up and their technique is perfect for a high school kid, and you're now trying to coach them in college, they don't want to you're reteaching somebody that already knows stuff. And a lot of times those kids don't want to be recoached. So you want a kid like Addison that's raw, that has some flaws to his game, because the technique side can be taught by that coach. And I think that's why you'll like a Zaire Addison. Plus, the kid's a great kid. You meet him in person, the kid's got a great personality. He's a very good kid. He seems very coachable. I think that with all the physical traits he has, you add that together with what he provides, this is a type of kid that can be an all-conference, maybe an all-American down the road.
Yeah, you wrote about Max Buchanan as well, who I mentioned earlier. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I think Max is one of those guys that, lunch pail, old school. Miami's had these guys before on their teams, these tough, rugged, physical. He's not the most physically impressive kid. Like, he's not like Zaire Addison has way more upside. Max is almost like a finished product in that he has very good technique. He does everything well at the camp. Now, my only questions with him is how much bigger is he going to get? Because you look at legs, trunk, how big they're going to get in the lower body, because that could tell you how much weight they could put on. Is he a kid that's only going to be able to get to 285, 290, 295? Well, if he gets to that, that means he's pretty much stuck at playing center. If he could get to 320, maybe you could kick him out to guard 315, 320. Because Mario likes big guards. He likes guys. Yeah. So this guy, he's very smart. You could tell he's very well coached. He understands the game. He has a high football IQ. So Mario may be recruiting this type of kid mainly as a center, knowing that he's going to be the one making the line calls and doing all that. And Max is able to do that. I think he's a guy that could probably play earlier than someone like Zaire, just because of his football knowledge, his ability to do things that maybe Zaire can't do at this time. But Zaire has more upside. He's that guy that will be that NFL prospect, where I think Max can be maybe an all ACC type player, a really good college football player, but his upside's not the same as Zaire's.
Yeah, some of the guys we're going to talk about here going forward are Miami targets. Other ones are not, at least so far. If you want to get a list or a good look at who Miami is targeting, that's in my story over at The Athletic, where I did a full roster breakdown. You can see position by position. I mentioned all the guys that have come in on visits or will be taking official visits to Miami as far as high-end targets. One guy for sure that's on that list is Floyd Buchard. And both of us got a chance to see him at the Under Armour event that was in Miami, at Miami Crop, I think at the beginning of March. He went to this Rivals camp, and I know he looked pretty good too.
Yeah, Floyd, and you saw with him, he's got a big backside, big legs, big trunk. Like, that what you see from Floyd right now and what he's going to look like once he gets into college. This is a kid that's going to probably get up to about 330. And now he's been in a college weight program. He's gotten the nutrition that he needs. This is a type of kid I think can just really blow up and be a big physical, nasty guy. These are the type of players you see Auburn for years recruiting, and you're always like, how did Auburn find this kid? How did a Louisville find this kid? He's one of those under the radar kids, came from Canada. He had told us he had played hockey. I can't imagine this kid on skates. I would run
6'4", 290 on skates. Yeah, that'd be something. Yeah,
I would run right off the ice if I saw this kid. But Floyd is very powerful. The thing is he went against better offensive linemen at this camp. So you saw he didn't just bully guys like he did at the Under Armour camp. We had said At the Under Armour camp, the offensive linemen weren't as good. You had a kid like Max Buchanan who's probably been to 30 camps already. He knows how to, he's been coached up, how he's adjusted how to deal with somebody like Floyd. It's Floyd right now, right? Mainly a bull rusher. He's just trying to really bully guys. And that he wasn't able to do those same things, but it was all right. He still didn't lose battles. He didn't get pancake blocked or thrown on the ground. At worst, they were, push type performances, but you can still see the physical hands when he engages with somebody. They got to readjust because he's so powerful with his hands that he's able to recreate that line of scrimmage, and that he pushes the center back. What happens is now that center goes into the quarterback or causes a running back to have to run wider. That's where even if Floyd doesn't make a tackle, I think Floyd's one of those players that's going to eat up blocks, allow his defenders behind him to make a lot of plays. He's that old school 4-3 University of Miami D tackle. I think this is the type of guy that in 2 or 3 years, you're going to be talking about NFL draft.
Yeah. One guy that you mentioned that's still part of the 2025 class, who I think is probably one of the best players in the state, is Javian Hilson, who is committed to Florida State. I saw you wrote here, he's Dallas Turner all over again. 6'4", 225 out of Cocoa, just a beast.
Yeah, he was unblockable at the camp, and it's just because I think most of those guys are not used to that speed. Plus, he lined out so wide. I mean, he lined up so wide, but that by the time he got off the ball, I mean, the only chance a tackle has is if they're able to get their hands on a guy like this. He got off the ball so wide and so quick that by the time he turned the corner, it was like a sprinter in full motion. They're not getting out there.
Right.
So like, he had such an advantage. I really don't think they should have allowed him to do what he did at the camp, but he was just blowing by guys. And then once he cuts up the field, if they are able to get back outside, he just rolls back inside and they're off balance. They're like falling over their feet, and he gets inside. He gets to the pad or the quarterback or whatever. He's a special talent. I think this is the type of kid that's a top 10 player in the draft if he develops. We've seen, I mean, we could go over this. How many over the years, 20, 30 years of doing this, 20 years of doing this now, that we've seen these elite players, a lot of guys, and they don't pan out. If he's willing to work hard, the physical talent's there, he could be a top 10 pick in the draft if he works hard, So
2 other guys that on defense that I wanted to bring up to you, that just interesting names. Both of them in the 2026 class. One of them is committed to Miami. That's Jordan Campbell, the linebacker, 6'2", 200 out of Carroll City. What are your thoughts on him? I know he's still getting recruited by other schools, but just as a player. And then Demetrius Gathers, who's from West Boca Raton, defensive end, outside linebacker. Yes, it's related to that Gathers, former Hurricane Jason Gathers, who played at Spanish River. So your thoughts on Gathers and your thoughts on Miami's 2026 linebacker commit, Jordan Campbell.
Yeah, Gathers, just turn on the film. You'll see he makes a ton of plays. I mean, he's constantly, this is the type of kid that goes to University of Pittsburgh when Charlie Partridge is there, ends up, how did he end up so good? Well, it's because he has those traits that he would look at in a defensive lineman. Super twitchy off the ball, gets off the ball before the tackle gets out of his stance, has that athleticism. You can see he looked like an athlete, not a defensive end. And that's scary because I don't think this kid even realizes how good he's going to get and hasn't even come close to reaching his potential. I think he's one of these guys that will blow up this summer when he starts to go to summer camps. And this year, I think he has a great year for West Boca. As far as Jordan Campbell, I'm starting to really like this kid even more and more. He's always like, hey, Mr. Fishbein. And, he's very respectful. I mean, he's one of these kids you want to cheer for. He looks the part. I think Jordan's listed at 6'2", 200. I think he's bigger than that. I think Jordan's one of those guys that is listed as a linebacker, but maybe ends up a defensive end. It's his height, his length. I think he could put on a lot more weight. He's a kid I saw last spring. He was a freshman going into his sophomore year. And I actually had my son film the scrimmage. I'm like, man, American has another kid. The last time they had a kid that looked like this was Olivier Vernon.
Yeah.
And, you always wonder when you're at these schools that don't have talent. Am I evaluating this kid right? Am I right on this kid? And then all of a sudden they blow up after, and you're like, all right, I reassured myself I was right on this kid. He's going to become a big time talent. I don't think his recruitment's over because he's going to just get better and better. I think his value of what he can do, his versatility of being a defensive end, outside linebacker, maybe a rush edger. He's going to have so much versatility. It's going to just jack up that NIL deal. So, Jordan, if you're listening, your NIL deal probably just went up about 5% while we're talking about you. So,
couple guys on offense. Derek Cooper, I saw at the Under Armour, the kid from Chaminade, running back, who's 6'1", 200. I think in today's game, I mean, he could play both sides of the ball, offense or defense. But if you can put this kid on defense, I mean, he would be such a disruptive force. But you have him among your standouts at running back. And then another kid who I know everybody's excited about out of Orlando Jones, Vernell Brown, the third. He's just one of these elite receivers, plays for, I think, the South Florida Express, 7-on-7 team. Tell me about the guys on offense that really pop for you.
What's funny is I think Derek's a running back, and I think Vernell's a defensive back.
So you and I are on different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think Derek, like watching Derek, I think this kid. You look at the Sony Michels, you look at the Dalvin Cooks, the guys that have come out of South Florida, and he doesn't have the same hype coming out, but he was even better at the Under Armour. I mean, at the Rivals camp that he was at Under Armour, and I was standing with Tavani Mizell and his dad. They were watching him and they were blown away. Like, he's like, wow, that kid's really good. Just so smooth. I don't believe there's a linebacker that can cover him. I mean, he is that good. You bring him out on a wheel route or throw him into the flats or run him on a screen, putting him one-on-one with the linebacker, he's going to win that 100% of the time. He is that special. He's just so smooth. He's electric. I think this kid can be one of the elite running backs, not only in Florida, but the country. I mean, I think he's that special. I could be dead wrong.
I think he's potentially Sean Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, he could be. I mean, he's so big and physical. Like, he runs a lot like Sean did in high school, just very effortlessly, And I don't think he's done growing. I think this is a kid that could be like 6'3", 225 pounds, in a couple years. I think the kid has a ton of talent, and I think he's going to end up a 5-star player in the state of Florida.
2026 kid, by the way. So he still has another 2 years to go.
Yep.
What about Vernell Brown, who you think is a safety, even though I think his hands are just ridiculous?
Yeah. I mean, he's a very good player. The whole thing is this state, how many times have we seen 5'11", 180-pound wide receivers? It goes back to the Deontay Thompsons. It goes back. I mean, I remember people telling me Randall Hill should have played corner in college. It's just, you're at that size, his money positions corner, in my opinion. There's just, we've seen a lot of great receivers. Is he as good as Brandon Inniss? I don't think he was as good as Brandon Inniss. And Brandon did get on the field as a freshman. So I think Vernell has a lot of talent. He has great hands. He runs great routes. I see a kid that I think he could be very good at receiver. I think this is a guy that's a day one player on defense. I think he could be a special corner, a shutdown corner. That's where his position. That's where I would recommend him to play. He's going to have success on either side of the ball, but I think he has more upside on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, if you want some more recruiting coverage, make sure you check out what Charles has written over for Rivals.com. Great job, as always, talking recruiting with you. We're going to bring you on more throughout the year to do that stuff. Now I want to kind of go back in time, because you and I are old school fish. I had this interesting project that I'm still doing. I'm actually doing this for every major state. We're picking all state teams for the modern recruiting era, which is basically since Rivals and Scout and 247 and all these websites have come out, and that was basically starting around 2002. I covered high schools for the Miami Herald starting in 1999, so I go a little bit further back. But as far as what we use for criteria, 2002 to modern day, and basically we didn't just pick a bunch of NFL guys. We tried to pick guys that thrived the most in college, because that's whether or not you pan out as a recruit, right? That's the immediate thing. Can you become a stud in college and help your team win and become All-American, etc.? So 48 consensus All-Americans have come out of the state of Florida since the modern era of recruiting began in 2002. We had to pick 26 guys, our all-state team. Okay, we picked 12 on offense. That included an all-purpose player, 11 on defense, and 3 on special teams, including a kick returner. Again, we prioritized not what they did as pros, but rather what they did in college. So I'm going to give you the offense. I'm going to read them off to you. Not a lot of Miami representation here. In fact, none at all. We got a couple Gators, and we've got 2 Florida State guys on this offense. Okay. I'm going to go down the list. Quarterback.
Well, that shows you why Miami hasn't been winning titles
Well,
for the last 20 years.
There's 6 Alabama guys on this team.
Yeah,
Okay.
what a shock.
What a shock. All right. Quarterback, Tim Tebow out of Florida. Running backs, Derrick Henry and Trent Richardson. Receivers, Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy. All purpose, we'd put Lamar Jackson. Can't deny a Heisman Trophy winner. We got 2 Heisman Trophy winners on this team. Tight end, Nick O'Leary out of Florida State. And then our offensive line was Max Jean Gillis, who's an All-American at Georgia, Alex Leatherwood from Alabama, Evan Neal from Alabama, and then Marquise Pouncey and Brian Stork. Pouncey, of course, 9-time Pro Bowler, I think, in the NFL. Stork was a Remington winner at Florida State. Any objections to what I picked on offense?
I'm taking credit for Brian Stork. That's one of my finds. I take credit. The kid was a tight end in college, in high school, and I basically pushed him, out there, because what was crazy is when I went to Vero Beach, it was for a kid, Zeke Mata, who ended up at Notre Dame. The coach brought me in. Brian Stork was a tight end, and he was actually going against a Miami player. I think it was like one of these kids from Jupiter or something, and he dominated him. I mean, just dominated the kid. He goes, that kid's going to Miami. So I sent his stuff out at the time. His dad was ill. So he went from like 260, 270 down to like 220. So when coaches came in, they were like, we can't recruit this kid. Florida State took a flyer on him as a center. He ended up an All-American his final year, played with the Patriots as a freshman. So I take credit for Brian Stork.
The toughest cut for me on this team was not putting Dalvin Cook on there and going with Trent Richardson. And the only reason I did this, Fish, is because Richardson actually won the Doak Walker Award. Derrick Henry, of course, won the Heisman. He was a lock. Running back, any other guys you think should have been represented on here?
I mean, Clint Portis, I don't know if he,
No, he wouldn't have been 2000. Yeah, it would have been beforehand. Yeah.
So I mean, you got some good ones. I would have put Dalvin ahead of Trent, just because I think Dalvin, he was a special player in college. I think Trent was a good runner, but he had limitations that Dalvin didn't. And Dalvin, I mean, how many times were they behind in a game? They handed on the ball and Dalvin was in the end zone, whether it was against Miami or whether it was at Clemson or whoever they played. Like, Dalvin was on teams nowhere near as good as Alabama, and he would freaking win the game for them. So I think he was a little better just because of the special talent that he was.
All right. I can see your point there. By the way, just for people keeping score at home, 30 multiple Pro Bowlers have come out of the state of Florida since the modern recruiting era. That's the most of any state, okay, in terms of NFL guys. So not all of them were college All-Americans, but a lot of these guys became Pro Bowlers, multi-time Pro Bowlers. I mean, guys like Geno Atkins, Khalil Mack, who came out of Fort Pierce Westwood, obviously Antonio Brown, Brandon Marshall. These are all guys that didn't make our team, but were tremendous pros. Again, we put these guys, we made mention of them, but ultimately we prioritized college success. All right, I'm going to give you the defense, okay? 4 defensive linemen. Joey Bosa from Ohio State went to St. Thomas Aquinas. Jalen Carter out of Apopka. Terrence Mount Cody from Alabama, was a 2-time All-American, Fort Myers Riverdale High School. Yeah. Elvis Dumerville from Louisville, Miami Jackson, just a great player all over the field. And then our linebackers, Devin Bush from Michigan out of Pembroke Pines Flanagan, Dallas Turner, who you had to put Dallas Turner on that team. I mean, the SEC Defensive Player of the Year, right? St. Thomas Aquinas. Levante David was the 3rd linebacker out of Miami Northwestern. And then the secondary, this is a little controversial, but every single one of these guys won the Thorpe Award. All right. I'm just going to premise it by saying that. DeAndre Baker out of Georgia, out of Miami Northwestern. Gerard Holloman from Louisville. He had 14 picks in one season for Louisville, out of Miami Southridge. And then Patrick Peterson from LSU, Pompano Beach Ely. And then Patrick Surtain out of Alabama and Fort Lauderdale American Heritage. Your thoughts there on defense? Any guys that I absolutely screwed over?
I think Hargraves could have been one of those guys for Florida, the Gators. I thought he was really good.
Yep.
But no, I mean, overall, it's a good list. Listen, it's all subjective. There's so many guys that have come out that were really, really good. But I mean, Surtain, is one of the only kids I've ever given a 10 ranking to out of high school. And that was when he was in 8th grade going into 9th grade.
Yeah.
And friends of mine were like, he's that good. I'm like, yeah, he's that good. He'll be playing on Sundays. He's way better than his dad ever was. And you see it, he's a stud in the NFL.
Yep.
Patrick Peterson's probably the best corner to ever play in the state of Florida. He was special at Ely. I remember him coming to our combine. He had like a 42-inch vert, ran a 4.3. He was a special talent.
Who's the best linebacker in your mind?
Who were the ones you listed?
Turner, Levante David, and Devin Bush.
Of those, probably, I mean, Levante David probably, ended up the best of all of them, which is crazy because he came out of a Northwestern team that had way more talent, and he was like the least regarded, or at least recruited kid out of all of those kids. So,
right.
But overall, it's a good little group you got there.
Yep. You remember Mount Cody? He's a kid that ended up JUCO just because of grades, but he was tremendous.
He was a massive human being. And then you brought up the kid from Apopka. I
Jalen
remember
Carter.
I remember talking to McKinley Roll at the time, and there was the kid Gervon Dexter who came out of the same class, and I said, Gervon's good, but this kid Jalen Carter's better. He goes, there's no way. I said, yes way. He's better. He's my number one player I rated him the number one player in the state of Florida. And the last time I saw a kid that big move like that was Corey Simon. I mean, you have to go back that far, as big and athletic. I mean, here it was a guy that was playing running back in high school and tight end, and he was just demolishing people. And he was such a special college player. So it's no surprise there.
We've had 3 guys win the Lou Groza Award that came out of the state. Can you name them, Fish? I know you don't keep up with kickers, but there's been 3 guys that have won it.
I ain't going to lie. I shouldn't even say that. I hate kickers, man. My guess is one of the brothers that played at UM, I would say.
Borregales, yes.
He won. Borregales had to have been one of them. And then you got to figure FSU may have had one. I don't know.
Robert Aguayo. Remember Robert Aguayo?
Roberto Aguayo. And the other one's got to be the guy that's kicking for the Gators, right? Kick for the Gators that's in the NFL that for the Bengals. That's my guess is a third one.
No. One guy you forgot, Cairo Santos, who ended up going to Tulane. He actually won. He's a kid out of St. Augustine.
I got 2 out of 3. That's solid.
That's pretty good, bro. That's pretty good. The punter was actually a former
Forget that.
Johnny Townsend out of Orlando Boone. You remember Johnny Townsend?
Yeah. I mean, I think the next one that's going to come out is a kid from Columbus 2 years ago. Me and Andre watched booting 70-yard punts in a game.
He'll be the next one.
Yeah, okay. I forgot the kid's name. He went to Columbus. That's all I remember. Andre called me. He's like, "Oh, we were talking about a punter." I'm like, how good the kid must have been that he was banging everything inside the 3-yard line. I mean, it would bounce on the 3 and then go out of bounds and either hit just veer to the other side. It was crazy.
Yeah, Andre Fernandez from the Miami Herald, my longtime colleague who's covered high schools for so many years as well, is who you're referencing there. Devin Hester was the return specialist. I think that was a no-brainer. He's probably the greatest return man of all time. 5-star ranked number 27 in the class of 2022. So if it isn't for Devin Hester graduating in 2002, Miami doesn't have a single representative on this team.
Devin was, to this day, probably one of the top 2 or 3 high school football players I ever watched. He was at Riviera Beach, Suncoast High School. Just a special talent. Miami won out and then they beat Florida State out for him. But he was a difference maker in high school. He was that one guy that we're talking about, guys that played wide receiver that everybody thought, oh, this kid's going to be a corner. Everybody thought he was going to be the next Deion Sanders. It never panned out for some reason. Even though he's in the Hall of Fame, this is a guy that you always left you for wanting more. Like you're like, all right, this kid could have been really special as a slot receiver or corner. It just never happened, but he was one of the best special team players ever in pros. I think he's in the Hall of Fame now. So,
yeah. I wanted to get to a quick mailbag if possible. I'm skimming through these questions really quick, Fish. We're not going to go too in depth, but hopefully we get through them quickly here. This is from somebody called Viconomics on Twitter. He says, you project Mario, and I've said this before, to be Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. What if he's post-COVID Calipari at Kentucky? Great classes, getting a half bag for himself, but no titles. Do you think Mario will win a national title, Fish? Do you think, or do you think this is a Jim Harbaugh type situation? That's what I've compared it to. I think it took Harbaugh, what, 6, 7 years to get his team to the playoff, and then he finally wins the national title before going pro.
Well, I mean, Calipari did win a national title, and I know I'm not a fan of him as a coach, but yeah, I think every situation's different. Mario could have taken the approach originally where he came in, hit the portal hard, maybe got some extra wins, but at the end of the day, he's like, all right, so I win 2 or 3 more games. Is our program really gonna be that much better? He took the blow it up approach. He blew the thing up, got rid of a lot of guys, and now is trying to build the thing from the bottom up. And I do think eventually he'll play for a national title. Winning it is listen, if I could predict that, I could predict it's such a hard thing to do. Now you have 12 teams in the playoffs. Eventually you're gonna have 14. I do think he could get the team to the playoffs, win the ACC conference, and have a shot at a national title. And that's all you can ask for.
This is Andrew V17 asking, have you heard anything new on the football complex starting construction? Heard that was being pushed back and they're going to be working on extending the indoor facility and weight room. Yeah, look, it's going to be 3 or 4 years anyway before they start on the construction. Fish, you've been down there quite a bit. What do you think of just like how much change you've seen at Miami here the last couple of years?
I've definitely seen it. I mean, listen, it's still Coral Gables, so I'm sure like trying to get anything pushed through that city isn't the easiest, even though Miami probably has some ins, but they make a big deal about everything. So it's going to take a while. Anytime you say you're going to build something in that area, it probably takes 2 years just to get the plans pushed through before they can even forget breaking ground. So I definitely think they've upgraded the facilities a lot. I know there's parts of it I'm sure they'd like to get improved right away, but you know what NIL, man, you gotta reprioritize where you want to put that money. So
yeah. This is from Jake Campbell, the one Coach Soup on Twitter. Saw Mario's presser today. At 37, I say I've been following Canes football since the late Erickson days. Has there been another coach that you've covered, Canes related or not, that claps back as quickly and sternly with reporters as Mario? If you didn't see this today, Fish, Mario was asked about Jakari Brown at the end of the press conference, and if he's the fourth string quarterback. I know there's been some people sort of complaining that Jakari is getting screwed here at Miami, and do you want to just talk about Jakari Brown as a quarterback and whether or not you think he fits in at Miami?
One, I don't think he's getting screwed over. You just go to practice. The results don't lie. I'm of the belief Jakari has a lot of talent. I get it. He's a great athlete. That's what he is first. He's a great athlete. I liked him coming out of high school, but he's a round peg in a square hole. And he just doesn't fit. He's not an air raid. He's not one of these quarterbacks. I believe you put him at maybe Georgia Tech and you see the Haynes King kid who struggled at A&M, all of a sudden you incorporated an offense where he runs the ball a little more, roll him out, give him one read options. I think he could do well in that type of offense. It's just not at the University of Miami. There's nothing wrong with that. Nobody is saying the kid stinks or sucks or can't play. He just can't play at the University of Miami. Now, if he wants to stay at Miami and play receiver or tight end, I'm all for it, but he's just not a right fit. And listen, coaches are going to protect their players. Mario's invested a lot. He played the game. He understands. He gets it that media people have to ask these questions. But at the same time, these guys are family. You go to war every day with these kids. The kid's probably worked his butt off. Mario probably wants him to succeed. He doesn't want to see him fail. He's put a lot of time and effort into it. So you know what? If somebody asks a question, sometimes it's asked in a way. Maybe it was just asked the wrong way. The wording should have been different, and you clap back at somebody. I don't think, Mario probably, at the end of the day, I don't really think he cares what the media thinks, but he is going to protect his players. And I think that's any coach is going to protect their players. And Mario's a passionate person. He's very emotional. And this is one of his sons, basically. And this is why parents like him. Parents like him. This is why he's a good recruiter, because he tells these parents when they're recruiting him, hey, I'm going to be the father for your son. When you guys are a parent for your son, when you're not around, I'm going to protect them. I'm going to support them. And if the media gets on them, and this is the proof of it, that something happened like this.
Yep. Fish, appreciate all the time you gave me today, brother. It was fun. Make sure that you check out Fishbein's work at Rivals as well as the podcast.
Fishcast.
The Fishcast, right. You and Corey Long do great work there together. When's the next episode for you guys coming out?
We put one together yesterday. It's short. We talked about maybe about 15, 20 minutes. This kind of time of year is a little dead, but we'll talk about the spring games after this weekend. I'm sure I'll watch the Miami and Florida spring game. Florida, man, we talked about it. They need they should let that offense score like 40 just to because it's going to be a long off season for Gator fans. If they score 6 points in that spring game and don't get over midfield more than once, oh man, God bless that fan base. They may just blow that thing up.
Yeah, next week I'm gonna bring one of the Gator beat writers on the podcast to talk about the Gator spring game and get his thoughts on where things are.
What about the schedule? I mean, there's
and the schedule. Yeah, the over-under for wins is 5.5. I think
they gave them an NFL schedule. They're playing the Cowboys and Chiefs back-to-back weeks next year. So.
Yep, open with Miami August 31st. I'll be there for that. That's for sure. Fish, you're the best, brother. Thanks for coming on.
I'll see you later, man. Take it easy.
See you guys.